We are the Digital Dojo. I am Colleen, and this is Dana.
Hello.
And together, we are here to help you get unstuck no matter where you are stuck. I'm also a TCM practitioner, and I'm obliged to tell you that because it means that if I say something, it is not a medical diagnosis. It's just an opinion from an invisible person on the radio to an invisible person listening to the radio. And today we want to follow up on the heels of last week. So last week we talked about who you are when nobody's watching and what's actually going on in your head. So the natural accompaniment to that was in those moments, figuring out not only who you are, but what you want. So today we're diving into why you don't ask for what you want and what to do instead. So examples, the classic one, I'm fine. You say this when you're not fine, and you know you're not fine, and the person you're talking to knows you're not fine, but you both hang out inside the I'm fine fiction because it becomes easier than saying the thing. Or the classic one we hear all the time is, oh, I just need some space. And oftentimes somebody's actually saying, I really want you to notice that I've asked, and I need you to stay close anyway, to be there, to help me figure this out. Those are very different asks, but you made one of them out loud and you hoped the one in your head got listened to. So most of us are making two requests at the same time. And it happens 1, 2, 3, 5, 100 times a day. There's a thing that we say, and there's a thing that we really want underneath it. And usually the thing underneath it is the thing that we are not absolutely sure that we're allowed to ask for, or we're allowed to have, we're allowed to act on. And in that gap, there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of loneliness. So today we are getting into the gap, what we are actually asking for, why we ask that way, what it costs us when the people we love can't read the difference, and what it costs them to keep trying anyway. And then what it looks like when you start making the real ask out loud. So we have listener questions, but before that, Dana, invisible person next to me, what do you think?
I think all of that kind of thought and questioning comes down to a really simple basis for me. It's a matter of self-worth and deserving. Part of why we don't ask for what we really want or need is because of, on some level, the idea that we don't feel like we actually deserve those things. And we're not worth it enough to be a bother. We're not worth it enough to actually be listened to, understood, and soothed or helped or supported, or any of the things that feel like they're kind of like the crucial foundational blocks of us feeling accepted. So if that's at all resonant for any of you and feels possibly true, I'm looking forward to exploring that further, because I think it does distill down to those simple components. Am I allowed to be accepted fully and have my needs met? That also gives you a lot of responsibility about what you consider your needs as well too, and that's an interesting kind of take to look at from our own perspective, because sometimes if we are not clear on what our needs actually are as compared to what we think they are, we're not going to be as confident or certain in asking to have those things met. So all of that feels to me like it distills down to self-worth and deserving.
Most things do.
Keep it simple, man. Keep it moving.
So, well, let's start with that one. And then do we start with the self-sufficient question, or do we start with the person with the literal person, which is entertaining to me because I live with the literal person?
That I think is
The literal person?
a great way to get going.
Okay. So I will do the question and then I have a story. I have so many stories. So the question that was written in is, my partner is a very literal person. When I ask for something, I mean the thing and the 17 things underneath the thing. When he asks for something, he means exactly that thing. We've been together for 12 years and this gap still creates problems. Is there a way to bridge genuinely different communication styles when one person operates in subtext and the other doesn't? That is such a good question. And I am a subtext person. And the person sitting next to me is a very literal person. And I think we have both worked on communication over the years. So I'm so happy to address this. But I need to explain the purple purse story first because it is such a good example of it. So if that is okay with you.
I thought you were talking about an actual literal person in terms of like a real human being. So
You're not a real human
I
being.
wonder most of the time.
That's fair.
Quite honestly,
That's
I
fair.
really wonder.
I
But it's super interesting though, because that even makes more sense to what you just described it and explained it as, and I'm actually quite excited to talk about this. But that's how literal I am. So, like, I'm my own walking, living, breathing example.
So, one of the reasons we teach communication is because we have had to work on communication a lot over the years because I'm a subtext person and Dana is not. So, years ago, this is years and years ago, before we got into this work at all, we were moving and we were just doing the last scout round of the house.
Actually, that's not true. We were already working.
No, I was in school for TCM. Okay, Mr. Literal Person, irrelevant to the story, irrelevant to the story.
The timeline is very important. It was a long time ago.
It was a long time.
We can agree on that.
So we were doing the last scout to make sure we left nothing in the place because we were handing the keys in. And as I was getting ready to walk out the door, I realized I didn't have my purse. So I turned around and said to this very kind person who is always very helpful and always wants to help me and is always thoughtful. And I said, "Can you grab my purse?" And he looked at the purse on the ground and he looked at me and he said, "What purse?" And I thought,
I think I said which purse, but
right. Well, that's again very different.
and
So,
it was downstairs. That's why I know we
oh my God.
just
Real
'cause it's
time.
important.
This is a real time example.
I'm trying to emphasize the value of your story.
And I looked at the purse sitting between us that was closer to him than it was to me. And I said, "The purple purse. Can you please grab me the purple purse?" And he looked at the purse and looked at me and said, "Do you mean the maroon one?" Now, in my head, there were two voices, one of which was going, "What are you doing? It's been a long day. I mean, the purse that's right next to you." And when he asked me again, the other voice was going, "Oh, so you don't want to help me? You think I'm being a pain?" I started to explain all the reasons in my head for why he wasn't doing what I asked him to do. And then finally I said, "The purse that is right there that you're going to step on if you step forward 2 steps, can you bring me that purse?" And he said, "Sure, except," oh, it wasn't maroon, it was burgundy, you said. You said, "Sure, except it's not purple, it's burgundy." I heard that is as "you are problematic, etc., etc. I'm doing you a favor." And it took a long time. And then I finally said, "Why did you ask me that instead of just grabbing the purse?" And the answer was, "I wanted to make sure I was getting the right purse. How did I know there wasn't another purse up in the bedroom that you wanted me to go and get? And if I grabbed you the burgundy purse and we left and handed in the keys, your purple purse would be locked in forever." So I had a ton of stories about why he was calling me too difficult, about why he was saying I was doing everything wrong, why he didn't want to help me suddenly and inexplicably. And his brain was going, "It doesn't look purple to me." So how is that story on your side?
Excellent.
Would you care to answer the question about how to communicate with different styles, subtext to non-subtext?
I would. Yeah, and it's really reminding me of
That you're crazy?
there's that.
Yeah.
I'm not never too much in dispute of that fact. In fact, I lean into it more and more all the time. I think I'm nuts. But and it's like it kind of transcends like a male female thing. It transcends, a old young kind of dynamic. What I found from studying people's communication and how I communicate with people is that people tend to either lead more factually or with facts, obviously, or they lead more with feelings, right? So really, it's a question of remembering that we all have this bias that automatically predisposes us to think that everybody thinks like us. And sometimes we're startled when we realize that people don't automatically think that the way we do about something. And in that little bit of startle, we get a bit insecure, we get a bit anxious. And if we know how to allow that reaction to occur within ourselves and then understand that really anytime we are feeling fearful, it's really a signal of what I'm going to call the stakes of a situation, right? So usually we don't get too fearful or anxious about things we don't care about very deeply. But if we do, that's an indicator that, hey, like it is in this case, I had thought in a subtextual way in a different direction than Call had thought, because I was thinking about, I want to make sure I grab the right one. From my recollection, factually, we were in quite a large empty room, and the purse that Call was referring to, that I was trying to make sure it was the right one, was way in the far corner of the room while we were standing by the door. So it was, the lights were off, it was kind of dim, getting into sunset, and the lights weren't on because we were packing up and moving out. And I was thinking automatically, oh my gosh, yeah, all the things you said. If I grab the wrong purse, if I don't remember that there might be another one, what if she leaves all of her ID? And what if my keys are in there and my cell phone's in there and I've forgotten that she's maybe picked them up and put them in? We're going to walk out, lock that door, and not going to be able to get back to our valuables for the rest of the evening at the very shortest. So that recognition of, hey, people lead with either a more factual kind of assessment of things or a more feelings-based assessment of things. And that if I can identify that and respect it in the moment, even, well, and we both did actually, because Call had the ability to kind of stop and go, wait a second, I don't think that Dana's response is based upon all the worst possible fears in my head of not being valuable, seen, or accepted. Maybe he's just leading his inquiry into the conversation from a different perspective than mine. So we both kind of did that in the moment. And it was simply anchored to the idea of like, hey, you know what, people just, yeah, not everybody thinks the way you think automatically all the time. And we were able to kind of navigate through and find out that Paul wasn't trying to be critical or judgmental of me. And I certainly was not trying to be not helpful to her. In fact, we both had good intent as to what it is that we were trying to accomplish. And that little bit of pause between reaction and response allowed us to kind of get to that clarity much faster than if either of us had just reacted.
And my shorthand for that is, as an easy way to do it, when you are not in mid disagreement, explain your communication style, ask about your partner's communication style, and then check on it the next time. Because the more often you practice that very specific ask, the better. So, there was the pasta night where I phoned and said, hey, I had a really long day. I'm going to stop and get some stuff from the store on the way. Can you put water on for pasta? And Dana's pause was very long. And then he said, okay. And in my subtext brain, I went, okay, but I'd rather not. Why don't you do that when you get home? Because I'm so much more important. And it proceeded apace from there where he was like, well, which pot? And I was like, what do you mean, which pot? The pot that we cook pasta in. And when I finally got myself under control and I said, so when you're asking me which pot, do you just mean which pot? And he said, yeah, I don't know if you've got a different kind of pasta in the freezer that I don't know about that you want and it needs a bigger pot or a smaller pot. And I want to make sure I do this right so that things are as easy as possible. So the more often you can check in on those things, it just becomes another conversation rather than, oh God, another conversation.
Well, that's kind of reminding me too of how, um, when we're in that grounded, neutral place, which we're not all in all the time, of course not, but we want a good sense of what it feels like to be in that grounded, neutral place so that we can get back there as quickly as possible. It makes you realize how both sets of information, what I'm calling facts and feelings, are super informative. Like that's information that's very valuable and useful when both are considered. So facts aren't more important than feelings, and feelings aren't more important than facts. Both offer good clarity and insight into the context of a conversation that allow you to return to neutral and grounded more easily, if that makes sense. So when all about the pasta in the pot,
Mhm.
I was already, and we've just both just kind of learned to speak the subtext to each other as soon as we feel like we're missing each other in conversation. We don't always have to because now we understand more deeply just that, well, that's the person's initial preference. That's the come from that they will gravitate to first. They'll talk about their feelings first, and then they'll talk about the facts in light of their feelings, or vice versa. What we've recognized how to do was give some grace for that subtext because I was thinking, Paul's a way better cook than me. I'm actually really happy to do this and get dinner ready for when she gets home so that we can both eat faster and earlier. I'd like it to be really good. If it were just me, I wouldn't care about these details because I'm not looking for mouthfeel and I
Mhm.
use salt and pepper as the whole palette of spices that I might cook with, and I can make something
So
that's delicious and tasty enough for myself. But in consideration of that request, I wanted to know and was acknowledging her experience and knowledge over mine so that I could actually do a job that wasn't just pleasing to me, but was actually going to be really, really tasty and nutritious for her as well. So when you learn that that subtext is already automatically in your own head, if you can also fill in some of those blanks before the person's left to be guessing and filling in the blanks with their worst fears about whatever story is going on in each of your heads, then we can kind of cut through all that haze and detritus around anything that's going to make us feel like, oh, we're not being listened to. Because most of the time, if that's happening, usually it's because the person's just, sometimes we're just flat out not listening because we're distracted or tired. But most of the rest of the time, it's just that they're missing some information and it's not part of their intent.
I like it. Okay, I'm going to read two questions next because one of them answers the other one, but they are also both asking the same thing.
Oh, neat. I like when that happens.
So the first one says, I think I've spent most of my adult life asking for things indirectly and then being hurt when people don't respond to what I actually need.
Hmm.
I'm starting to realize that's not fair to anyone, but making a direct ask feels genuinely terrifying. What's underneath the terror and how do you work with it? And then the next question actually answers that question. So this gentleman says, when I finally do ask for what I actually want and don't get it, the hurt is so much bigger than when I asked for the safer thing and didn't get that. Like the direct ask makes me more vulnerable to the no. How do you keep asking directly when the risk of rejection feels higher?
Yeah. Very great questions, both that dovetail into each other beautifully, and also kind of oddly have been the theme of the week so far.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really lovely that those are the questions that came in because certainly just in the last few days, I've run into some permutation of those kinds of questions all over the place, even down to the point where I was able to have a really, really useful and thorough discussion with a group of people that were directly experiencing that fallout. Like we spent an hour and a half, not in the conversation, but the people were describing the situation. We spent an hour and a half trying to figure out what someone was needing and wanting and why they were getting upset. And then by the time they finally were able to just come clean and ask directly for what they were looking for, everybody in a flush sort of realized that like they could have solved the problem in about 2 minutes as opposed to 90 because the ask when they all were sort of exasperated and frustrated and tired came out really cleanly. So and then they were all kind of laughing and in various states of amazement that they're like, oh well, like yeah, of course we would be happy to do that for you. Um, and our anything that felt like our resistance was coming from our confusion of your ask, not because we were refusing to do anything for you that would feel supportive and safe. So I think that maybe this ties to the facts and feelings perspectives, right? The idea, and I know those are sort of two sort of broad categories, but they kind of cover the way in which human beings communicate, right? Our feelings, our energy are going to tell a particular story, and then the facts and the words that we use are going to tell a particular story as well. They kind of analogize what the difference between listening to someone and hearing them. And we could, I guess, make those interchangeable, but I know for myself in my work, when I define those two things, I talk about hearing as different from listening and differentiate them, the two of them, in a very simple way. We can hear a whole bunch of things in any environment that we're in. I can be getting ready to put pasta on after a call tells me what pot to use to boil the particular kind of pasta I was asking about. And I can be hearing the television in the background with the newscast going or some music playing and not necessarily be present with what I'm hearing. Right? When we talk about listening, a simple way that I describe this to people is when you're really listening, it's a matter of an intentional shifted focus so that you can be able to, and it's corny, but it helps you remember, list the things, right? So listening is putting your focus on a particular ability to not only hear what's being said to you, but understand and assimilate what's being said to you in a way that you can listen, you can list the things that were communicated. That I think is a really powerful component of being more and more confident in asking for what you need or want, right? Why am I tying those two together? Because oftentimes when we're speaking, we're hearing ourselves speak, but we're not really listening to ourselves speak. Again, people will say things because they think that that's the proper, appropriate thing to say or the way to be polite and socially acceptable. But if they were really deeply listening to what they were communicating, they'd realize how far off the mark what they're saying is from what they're actually intending and what they actually are intending in terms of their own needs. Right?
Okay, but bring this back then to how do you keep asking when the risk of rejection feels higher? Because if you are listening to yourself and you are asking the real thing and the person still says no, then what do you do about the rejection?
It's a really interesting sort of dance that occurs, and that's a great question. Um, I don't correlate it like this: the more a person is speaking from a place where they're actually listening to themselves, okay, the more accurately they'll be communicating about what it is that they need or want, right? Because when we're not listening to ourselves and we're getting distracted by sort of those things that we are taught in terms of like what's acceptable to ask for or how it's acceptable to ask for things in any kind of environment, when you're not listening to yourself, you'll start to realize, and it's a really sort of subtle thing, but man, is it powerful when you grasp the concept of what we're talking about here. And this is just the language that I use to describe this. We could describe the phenomenon in a bunch of different ways, but I try to keep it simple for myself. When I'm not deeply listening to myself as I speak, the gap between the words I'm using and the feeling that I'm communicating in terms of my energy starts to get wider and wider and wider. Okay. I feel like, and this is maybe a bit of a challenging thing to look at from this angle, but thanks for bearing with me. I feel like part of what happens is the reason why we feel rejected or we feel like we actually can't ask for what we want is because in that misalignment, in that gap between the words we're using and the feeling of the words, people are getting more and more and more confused, right? As we get confused, obviously we lose clarity. As we lose clarity, everybody gets more anxious. So the anxiety that's produced is the thing that makes it more challenging to handle, one, the ask from the person who's listening, and two, the anxiety of the potential rejection, because we're sensing an anxiety that we think we're automatically going to connect to. Well, it's because of what I'm asking for. I shouldn't be asking for anything. I don't have the right to do that. People are getting uptight because they know they're going to say no. Nobody likes to say no, and they're going to feel pressured if I keep asking for this thing or talking in a way that makes them think I want something, and then they're going to say no, and they're already feeling that pressure. So everybody's anxious, right? So we're already heightened. By the time the no arrives, it doesn't need any extra gasoline because the anxiety that's driven it there is the thing that makes it awkward and feel like it's full of rejection. When we can listen deeply to what we're saying, stay in alignment more accurately with what it is that we're trying to communicate, what it is that we're actually needing from moment to moment to moment as we explain it to someone else, the anxiety on both sides of that communication loop tends to stay low, because listening to yourself is the way you measure how well you're listening to someone else. You can't really listen to anyone else without deeply listening to yourself. Everybody will hear each other, but the energetic part of the communication is being lost in the over fixation on, well, I got to get the words right.
Yeah, I'm with you, but okay. I had somebody come into the clinic, a new client.
Mhm.
Coming in postmenopausal, coming in because their friend said, you've got to go see Colleen. I had hot flashes and now I can function again. So came in, I was like, yep, let's get you on some formulas. Let's shift. It's just a yin deficiency thing. Don't worry about it. And she said, okay, but I'm going to the island for the weekend and visiting my brother.
Mhm.
Love my brother. Know my brother loves me. Um, Last time I went, I was so hot. I was so hot. I was so hot. And she's like, with my general heat tolerance is terrible, and I panic inside when it gets hot. And asked the brother if they could change the air conditioning, and there was a no.
Mm.
And so said, I really want to go over to the island. I really want to see my brother. It's been a long time, and I don't know how to handle that no, because
Change the air conditioning in the car while they're driving, you mean?
no, because
Or at the
she'll be
place you're
staying
arriving
at
at?
her brother's
Right.
house. And her brother said, no, I'm comfortable at this. Like, it's set where I want it set. So no, we're not changing. And she said, I know there's no ill will there. There's just a lack of understanding about what that means to me. But she said, what it means to me is that I kind of don't want to go. So the anxiety of I'm asking, I'm going over at some point, I'm going to have to ask to turn the AC up, and I'm going to get a no, and I'm going to have to work really hard not to take it personally, and also to breathe.
Yeah, fair. Two things that stand out to mind for me right away. And thanks for leading me in that direction, because that's where I was ultimately wanting to go. Generally speaking, and this is from my experience, try it on for size, see how it fits, and if it feels reasonable and resonant to you. The more that a person speaks from a place that they're listening to themselves first, listening to how their energy is moving, listening to the words that they're using, paying attention to how they're communicating, the less likely it is of two things are going to happen. One, the less likely it is that you're going to hear no. And I can explain what I mean by that if that is feeling a little bit uncertain. But people who listen to themselves deeply while they communicate tend to communicate with more verbal and energetic alignment, and therefore the things they communicate are generally easier to understand. That correlates to not hearing no as often as you might be anticipating, for a bunch of reasons, which I can touch on in a sec. But if you, one, are likely to not hear a no when you're speaking and listening to yourself deeply as you do so, then two, if you do hear a no, which is possible, certainly not as likely, but possible, you're also going to be less prone to taking it personally. And because you'll be less prone to taking it personally, you'll be able to understand much more effectively how well the person that you're speaking to was listening to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be able to gauge much more effectively how well that person was listening to him or herself. Right? When you don't take the no as personally, you'll recognize that the no is most likely coming more from a misunderstanding, okay, than from a desire to reject your request or your need. Okay. And there's nothing, manipulative or subconscious or hypnotic about this. It's just acknowledging that a large part of how we communicate with each other as human beings is based on how we feel about what we're saying more than the words we're using to say it. We communicate, and there's lots of studies that will correlate this. About 10% of what we communicate is done with words. The rest of it, the other 90%, is done with our body language, our tonality, our rhythm, our volume, the general energy and demeanor of our body position, our physical presence. Like all of those things count highly for how we communicate with one another. So, and then the other part of that is if you feel like you've been able to communicate as well as you can, you've been in as much alignment as you can because you're listening to yourself with your words and your energy, and the person still says no, you can get curious and inquisitive about why that no is, because there might be something that's confusing them still that they're not actually listening to. They're just hearing the story in their head more than they're listening to your words. Or two, you can make a choice based on that and say, well, yeah, I'd love to come visit, but I'm going to be miserable and overheated the whole time. So maybe I won't come visit during August. Maybe I'll wait till October. Right. So you give yourself more choice around any interaction that you're having, and having more choice lowers anxiety. Lowering your anxiety clarifies and cleans, makes your messaging really clean, and leaves you less prone to being triggered into depths of any shame and rejection.
Yeah, we talked about having choice, and I said if that's, I mean, we didn't obviously go into this amount of detail, but I said you are allowed choices in that moment. So when you get too hot, just say, I'm really sorry, I have to go take a cool bath and lower my core temp. And if you do that 1, 2, 4 times a day, there's a different sort of reality to it's too hot for me, which isn't just, oh, I'm a delicate flower and I want you to do what I want you to do.
Well, and that speaks to the other powerful component of this that hopefully we're getting across clearly is, there's a reason why the phrase is actions speak louder than words, right? And that's not in any kind of confrontational way that we're thinking of it, but people tend to respond more to what you do or don't do, what actions you take or don't take, than what you say.
Mm.
Paul and I both deal with lots of people on a daily basis. We open up space to get really in depth with them and welcome them into being safe and comfortable. But we also have to function on a schedule because we're not just talking to one person daily. And this is something, even from my teaching days, I really had to learn, and it was challenging. But now that I've kind of got a grasp on it, it's very effective. We use my class and my students, for example. If I said, okay, everybody, it's time to get going because we've got to go get changed to transition from our grammar work to our PE class. So I'm going to need everybody to start packing up your stuff in the next 5 minutes because we've got to be on time to change over classes with the gym. I would say that, and then I'd kind of stand there and look at them, and then they'd be standing there looking at me, and then they would be not doing what I was asking them to do. And then I'd get frustrated, and then I'd feel like, oh my gosh, these kids are being ornery and they don't want to hear what I'm saying. And all that stuff would flow through my head. Then I realized one day, almost by accident, when I got so frustrated thinking that I wasn't being listened to, instead of standing there and getting more glowering and uptight at them, I just started packing up my own stuff and doing the thing that I was asking them to do. I took the action to do it. And as soon as I started to do that, and I didn't say it anymore, I said it once or twice, and then I just started to pack up the rest of my stuff to get going, to go to shift to PE class, all the kids started doing it. Then that extended when I was all packed up, instead of standing there going, okay, why aren't these kids going to get going? Why aren't they listening to what I'm saying? I started to walk towards the door. And they were chit-chatting and, getting wrapped up in their little conversations while they were sitting there wondering what we need to do. And then as I started to walk towards the door, they quieted down, got the stuff, and started to follow me. Right. So it's a perfect example of action speaking louder than words. And that speaks right to what you were
There's
just
a guy
saying.
on the radio.
Yes, of course. That says perfectly in line with what you were saying about, hey, well then, if you start remembering that you can listen to yourself, take control of your own needs, and meet them with initiative and self-sufficiency yourself first, people are amazingly reasonable and compliant because all of a sudden
I'm not.
There you go. You're the anomaly. People get very, very clear all of a sudden as to what it is that you need and why. And most of the time, unless people are deliberately trying to be jerk face jerks, which sometimes we all can be, they're once they understand, they're very happy to support and comply with what it is you need because they realize that it's not unreasonable or that outlandish, and they might ask for a similar thing in the same situation.
Okay, 15 minutes to go. I think we can burn through a few more questions. So this one I think is underneath those ones. I was raised to be self-sufficient. Asking for help was weakness. Needing things was inconvenient. Wanting things was selfish. I've unpacked a lot of that in therapy, but I still can't make a direct ask without immediately offering the person a way out of it. How do you make a clean request when you were taught that wanting things is always too much? I think there's a few different things in there, but there's nothing terrible about offering the person a way out of it. A lot of people do that out of politeness. And I would say, I know Dana's going to have an answer. Part of what Dana does with the Black Belt Mind is that he gives you ways to work through things in the moment. A big part of what I do is how do you, what nap round do we do? What piece do we address so that you don't have to do this again? And we trade places. We both do both. But for me, what I'm hearing is, oh, do a round of nap on wanting anything is too much. I'm not allowed to want things because that's at the heart of this is I'm not allowed to want things. And you can train your brain to ask for things a million times. That's your 40 bits of data per second brain, not your 20 million bits of data per second. And the 20 million bits of data per second brain is saying, if you ask for that, the world will end. If you ask for that, you won't be loved. If you do the thing you're not supposed to do, you will be alone forever. That's a big thing to overcome just to make sure you get the kind of salad dressing you want. So I would say the first suggestion would be do a round of something on I'm not allowed to ask for things. And
Definitely.
your answer?
Uh, I'm thinking about kind of what my focus tends to be, which is I really find it valuable for confidence and courage under pressure to understand the mechanics of what you're involved in, right? So I often will speak from that perspective. I want people to know how something works and how something doesn't work so that you can differentiate the two in the moment and make a good decision based upon real world, real time feedback. So my short form answer to that is the more you trust what you're asking for, the more people will trust your ask.
Mm.
And I hope that's a simplified way to kind of like cut right through to the heart of the engine that sort of drives this dynamic in communication, right? Because it's easy to slip into the idea that what I'm asking for is not trustworthy and so unreasonable, okay? And if that colors the way that you're asking, then the thing that the person's getting confused by or getting anxious by or picking up on is that energy, which is not the thing that you're asking for. It's the way that you're asking for it. So hopefully that idea of the more you trust your own ask, the easier it is for that ask to be trusted. And it sounds a bit word salady or a little bit paradoxical, I guess, but what I'm trying to speak to is like we are both all the time cause and effect, right? In order to cause something in the direction we want to go, we have to be willing to be affected by it and the environment in which we're trying to make that cause, and vice versa. So, what does it mean to trust your own ask? Well, how do you trust people in conversation? Really, if we stop and listen to each other and people feel like we're listening to them, i.e., we can list the things they just said. Okay. That's how we build trust. That builds across a gap of one person communicating to another person, but it also works internally as well. That's why listening to yourself is so important. Listen to the sensations that are coming up in your body. Listen to the feelings that are coming up in your mind. Listen to how your voice sounds and postulate how it might be coming across to someone else. None of that means that we have to be perfectly curated all the time. In fact, it's quite the opposite. What people respond to is the fact that we're paying attention. We're paying attention to how we're communicating. We're paying attention to how we're coming across. Nobody has to do it perfectly, but that focus and that commitment to pay attention, okay, makes you feel like you have a better insight as to what your needs are and why you're asking for them. In other words, it makes people feel like you trust your own ask. And when you do, that will translate to them most times in a way that makes them feel like you trust them. And if you trust them, you'll trust their response. And if they've given you a response, even if it's no, they'll trust you that you won't take that no personally. And this is all kind of unconsciously, right? We don't have to explicitly lay this out. It's the energy that we're exchanging. And when we're building trust in that way, it's very, very easy and easier anyway. It's not always foolproof, but easier to actually get across the clarity of what we're asking for and why. And most of the time in that environment, people will go, oh, okay, I get that now. That's actually really reasonable. And I can do that really easily for you. I'd be happy to. So that's what we're trying to set up as the dynamic here, right? And that's, again, on top of or in conjunction with, hey, let me go examine the deeper issues as to why I feel like I don't deserve to ask for this thing or why it's not reasonable for me to expect that I can be seen and heard. You know, AAA and the Black Belt Mind is kind of like battlefield triage. NAP and the process that NAP is okay, we've got you bleeding off the battlefield. We're back at the hospital now. Now we can actually look at the cause of the problem, look at the injury, look at the thing that's, going to get in our way in the future. With both of those, I feel like we've got a pretty sound approach to helping people change behavior.
That was an excellent essay. I like that you came up with it on the spot.
Ames, please.
I have an answer for the next one. I actually like this next one. And I have a joke answer for the next one. And actually, this person has written in quite a few times, and they've always got really good questions coming from a spiritual angle. So please continue to write these.
We love those
in because they're really fun for us. So this says, my spiritual practice has taught me to surrender, to let go of attachment to outcomes, to release the need to control, to trust that what's meant for me will come to me. I believe in that. And I also wonder if I've been using it as a reason not to ask for things. Like spiritual surrender and avoidance of vulnerability can look pretty similar from the outside. How do you tell the difference? So there's an old joke. We are not saying that any person's spirituality or religion or anything is good, bad, or other. This happens to be a Christian joke, so I will use this because it works, which is there's a place that is flooding and there's a man who's standing on his front step and somebody drives by and says, there's a flood, jump in the truck and I will help drive you to freedom. And the guy says, no, I trust that God will save me. And so the waters rise higher. So he goes to the second floor of the house and somebody goes by in a boat and says, jump into the boat. The waters are rising. I will save you. And he says, no, I trust that God will save me. The waters keep rising. He's on the roof of the house. Helicopter comes by. They throw down a rope and they say, grab onto the rope and we'll take you to safety. And he says, no, I trust that God will save me. And then he drowns. So he ends up in heaven. And as he walks in, I presume wet and annoyed, he says, what the heck? I trusted that God would save me. And that didn't happen. Why? What happened? And the answer was, I sent a helicopter, a boat, and a truck for you. Why didn't you just take what I offered? So part of that is the ask is important. You don't need to be attached to the answer, but the clearer you get on your ask, it's the clearer you get on the direction that feels good to move in, and the clearer you get on the truth of what's behind it, and whether or not things work at that point is part of the spiritual surrender, because you either learn that you are heading towards the quote unquote wrong ask, the wrong one for you at that time, or it allows you to find out the information you need on the way to getting the answer. So I would say that not asking and not intending, as far as I can tell, for almost all the versions of spirituality and religion that I'm aware of, which is not inexhaustible, is we're supposed to ask. We're just not supposed to demand that we get it exactly the way we want and exactly the way that we've demanded. That's my answer. What do you think?
It's a great answer. Uh,
Thanks.
this, of course, this is one of our final questions. This is the one I want to like talk about the most. But just to start setting it up for maybe future discussions, this all makes me think of the concept, of at least what I understand of the concept, and I'm very curious to see what everybody else thinks and feels if they've got any input of spiritual bypassing,
Mm,
spiritual bypass, and what that is, what that means. I'm not saying I've got the definitive clarity on what that means. I can talk about what it means to me and what I think it means in terms of a concept. Um, but it's feels really powerful and resonant and relevant to this question, right? The idea of spiritual bypass, the idea that and I almost think of like, I guess theoretically, I'd like to live in a world where it's, even if it's not highly likely, that it's very possible that I could sit on one side of our office, and if I wanted the door open, I could energetically, metaphysically, and with intention and focus sit in at the office desk across the room and then open the door with the power of my energy and mind. Super cool. Love that. That's even something that can be discussed as a possibility. Um, but I think that that can feel so provocative and falsely kind of spiritually safe that we can get to the point where we forget that I could just get up from the desk, walk across the room, put my hand on the knob, turn it, and open the door physically. So I'm all for awareness and depth of meaning and a search for transcendence and higher states of being. But I'm also on the lookout and careful not to exclude the physical world and my existence in this physical reality, however we surmise that we've all gotten here. Um, I don't think we have to exclude this part of our reality as something separate from our spiritual quest, our spiritual ask, our spiritual reach. And I know that that can feel sort of contradictory, but I think we can look at our beingness in the physical world in a very, very, very spiritual way. And one doesn't have to be exalted over the other or excluded below the other or separated from the other one. So that's
yeah.
kind of where that lands for me, because energy is expression and expression is energy. I think that we have physical energy that we deal with, we have emotional energy that we deal with, we have the energetics of energy that we deal with. So what people would call that spiritual energy, but all have a divine place in the mix.
Yeah. And I do think we're here, might as well enjoy being here and lean into the physical as not distinct from. Because one of the things that really spoke to me about Chinese medicine was that the spiritual, the energetic, the emotional, the physical, and the, I want to say elemental, like the five elements and the meridians and that sort of thing, they're all sort of the same. So I can talk about somebody coming in and saying, we really need to move some grief. And hey, we really need to move that congestion in your lungs. They can be the same thing.
Mm.
And there's a whole thing. I read this really interesting article on which religions are losing members the fastest.
Mm.
Interestingly, the two groups of people that are maintaining their, I'm going to say status, are no particular religion
Mm.
is staying no particular religion at about 72%, I think.
Right.
And Jewish people are at about 74% of still choosing as
Mm.
an adult to be Jewish.
Mm.
And then everything else comes in lower and often quite a bit lower of who is still following their practice as an adult.
Mm.
And most of the people who had a practice who leave it as an adult, they don't end up choosing another practice. They end up becoming either atheist or agnostic. So I think we're in this phase where we are not satisfied simply with rules for any part of our life, including spirituality, where we don't get to be entirely us. So spiritual bypassing, I think, is a move many of us have made out of desperation. And I can understand desperation, which is, I just want to feel better.
Sure.
And so we're not saying give up the spiritual bypassing in order to feel crappy, because why would you do that? But give up the spiritual bypassing and trade up, trade in for something where you can actually be yourself more.
Well, it kind of brings us full circle back around to, at least in my mind, what we kind of started with around this dynamic of facts and feelings, right?
Mm.
How we're taught by how things are modeled for us in a very proactive or, unaffirming way, either or positive or negative, that one of those things is more important than the other ones,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we are taught, if we're taught to lead with facts as the most important thing, and that's what we exalt, then we will just keep hammering on the facts, regardless of anything that's going on around us, because as we get more desperate and more anxious, we'll revert more to the tools that we were taught to use, or vice versa. People, in extreme cases, become emotionally bullying or emotionally manipulated because all they force into the conversation is the importance of their feelings or the feelings of other, regardless of context, time, space, or other factors of reality that they, might do well to acknowledge. So it's knowing when to put your focus on which one that I think is the key to the transcendence of the battle between either side, right? The rational and the resonant, the emotional, the factual, and the feeling. When we can know that, hey, I've communicated with as much listening as I can to the person I'm communicating to and to myself with the facts, and that's not creating more clarity for them, right? That might be the time to recognize that you can modulate and switch to talking about how those facts make you feel, or how you feel about those facts, or how you ask how the person is feeling about those facts. Because if we're talking about getting unstuck, flow is the antithesis of stuckness. So when things are flowing and we recognize that a conversation in one direction is starting to slow down in momentum, and we can switch it to the other modality, the other perspective, and it starts to flow again, that's where all of a sudden the space for listening and real communication and the communication of clear, well understood needs is being expressed, that the confusion starts to clear up relatively quickly. And then before you know it, we're building towards more and more and more and more and more alignment. But we can set the tone for that individually, right? If I'm speaking from an aligned place, if I'm listening to what I'm saying and I'm trying to understand how the facts of what I'm saying are impacting me and how the feelings are impacting how I talk about those facts, then I'm in alignment myself. And that's regardless of whether we have the specific language for it or not all the time in every situation, because we're not going to talk about it in a meta way in every conversation we have. It sets the tone for the person to kind of follow along, because being in alignment, and this is something I work with on a daily basis in the dojo in terms of its power. Being in alignment is powerful. Being in alignment is clear. Being in alignment actually expresses energy with intent. So if we can speak that way, it's going to be easier for others to follow suit. And then before you know it, we're all communicating about the thing we're actually wanting to talk about, not the thing that we're afraid to talk about and all the things that we're using to talk around it so that we don't actually talk about that thing.
Look at that timing.
And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
There you go. Right on the nose. We are done.
Jazz hands.
Yay, super jazz hands. Always like, I could not have anticipated for a second that this would be the stuff we were talking about tonight.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cool. I love it so much. We were just like, how did we end up here? But it's so great that we did. It's a lot of gratitude it produces, because it's like, wow, you just start listening, and before you know it, you go to all kinds of cool places.
Yeah, very much so.
On that note, who's going to do the shameless self-promotion this week?
I tend to do it more. Would you like to do it this time, or shall I get excited about the Etsy store again?
You can get excited about the Etsy store. I will back up all that wonderful Etsy store information with the other information about where the heck you can even find our Etsy store.
So come back next week. We're going to be talking about why adult friendships are hard and why they actually matter and what they do for you. So that is something we are looking forward to. And definitely send in some questions if you have questions. Love the questions. And go to our whichever account, the one with pictures, Instagram, our Instagram account and our Facebook. We usually post the questions coming up for the next week or for the current week, so you can also get the information there. And then go to the digitaldojo.net if you would like to be seeing our absolutely thrilling, at least to me, Etsy store. A lot of the concepts we talk about, we've simplified them, we've put them on art, and it's really cool. You can get them on a poster, you can get them on a canvas, you could be fancy schmancy, or just stick it in the back window of your car, which is probably a bad idea for visibility. But
Unless it's translucent
we don't have,
or transparent.
we
Maybe that's the
currently
next-
don't have transparent posters.
All right.
And when you go to the digitaldojo.net, you can also learn how to do NAP, which we talk about all the time. You can take the Black Belt Mind for free, which is learning one of the basics of the Black Belt Mind. It's the one that we find the most powerful. It's about innocence, which we'll have to talk about once in a while here. And that's it.
All that can be found at the digitaldojo.net 24/7, 365. You can get access to any of that information and any of these conversations. And we are excited to keep sharing these conversations with you and for you to participate in them. The questions that we're getting every week, so fantastic, so provocative, really wonderful. We welcome you to join us at the digitaldojo.net. Check us out on all the socials, from YouTube to Reddit to Pinterest to Instagram to Facebook, whatever flavor suits you best to engage and continue the conversation with us. We're excited to talk to you.